Hi, everyone. Welcome to True Disabled Story. My name is Nico, and I use he, him pronouns. I'm a white man with blonde hair, large blue and brown spectacles, and a gray t shirt with a gray and black image of a giraffe on it. I'm seated in front of a bookcase and a purple wall. This is my home office. Like roughly 25% of Americans and a full 17% of Philadelphians, I'm disabled. Whether we look locally, nationally, or even globally, disabled communities are full of dynamic, diverse, and frankly delightful people with their own stories to tell. All we have to do is listen. Now, many of you know that I was born disabled. I've never known differently, and I probably always will be disabled. So I'm naturally curious when I work with other disabled people about what their diagnosis story has been like, how that has impacted their lives, and all other things that they have to share. If you've met one disabled person, you've met one disabled person. The one disabled person I have the joy of speaking with today is my friend and frequent colleague, Jessica Lopez. Hi, Jessica. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm so glad to be here and connect with you again.
I'm glad to see you as well. So, Jessica, what was your path to diagnosis like? Was this a surprise, or was it something you were like actively pursuing? um, Folks who have been like me disabled since birth have like taken this question and expanded upon it to talk about maybe how they handled the disability through different stages of their life. So eager to hear your story.
So hi everyone, I'm Jessica Lopez. I am a Hispanic woman, and I have long brown hair, and I'm wearing kind of a black jacket. I was born without hands and feet, and I also live with chronic illness, and so like I have the dynamic of like having like disability from birth, and then also developing birth later on. So those are very like different experiences. When I was born, like my parents knew I was gonna be born without hands and feet when I was still developing in my mom's womb, and so but they didn't really know what to expect from that, just because like they knew I was gonna be missing all four of my limbs. But a lot of times when they see that in the womb, a lot of times the babies come out with a lot of like internal organ damage, intellectual disabilities, just a lot of like major health issues and often life-threatening kinds of issues. So they didn't know what to expect when I was, being born. But I kind of came out and everything was kind of fine. I wasn't born with intellectual disabilities. I don't have any sort of internal organ issues or anything like that. And so my body would just like develop completely healthy, except for the fact that I just don't have the bottom half of my arms and the bottom half of my legs. And so they told my mom, and I don't remember the specific like it's like a three-term word for my diagnosis. But the short term for it is they told her I was born with Mobius syndrome, which is a very rare disability. That I think there's only been like 200 cases in the world with it. And it's um characterized with limb differences, often even with multiple limb differences. And so we just kind of it's also characterized with like things like being hard of hearing, which I am, and also having like um a smaller jaw or like a really small mouth, which I also have. Um, but what was actually interesting was kind of like I just kind of took that, as its word, that was my diagnosis. So I just kind of lived my life with this is my diagnosis. Um, I later on learned the shorter term for it, Mobius syndrome, but then I started looking into it a little bit more. Cause like I wanted to know more about the disability. What does it look like? How many people have it? All of that. What I ended up discovering was that it was actually a misdiagnosis. The main characteristic of Mobius syndrome is that you have facial paralysis, which means a lot of times you are someone who maybe drool a lot or you just can't really move your eyes, stuff like that, which I don't have any of that. So if you look up Mobius syndrome, it's spelled Mobius. It will say the first thing is that it's characterized with facial paralysis, and then also comes with the other things. I thought that was kind of a big culture shock for me, like to realize like that is not describing me very well. So I was just like really kind of frustrated with the fact that like I went like 15 years of my life thinking I had one disability, and that was just not at all correct. Um, and kind of the big thing about it was, like I said, it's very rare. So there's only like a couple of hundred people in the world with it, which means there's not a lot of like scientific research behind it. There's not a lot of like information on how it presents. I know it presents very differently for different people, but like I said, the key characteristic is that facial paralysis. Um, it actually ended up being a really funny story. I just kind of knew that it was not my diagnosis, so I just kind of, went about life like that's not my diagnosis, but like, what is my diagnosis? I have no idea. Um, and then I don't know if you've actually heard of this person who became a TikTok star. His name was Gabe Abram. And he was a person who uh, he started as Gabe Abrams, but then he transitioned into, identified as a transgender person. So he switched her name into Brielle Abrams. Um, and so this person was born with basically like shoulders and like no legs. But I saw on their TikTok that they had put in their diagnosis as Hanhart syndrome. It's Hanhart syndrome. And I was like, I have no idea what that is, but it's really cool that there's somebody else out there who was also born with like full, deficiency. So I went down the rabbit hole of finding out, like, what is this disorder? It turns out that that was actually the same diagnosis that I have. It's very, um, kind of very describes me perfectly. Like, you're born with being hard of hearing, you're born with forelimb deficiency and also jaw issues, but it distinguishes itself from Mobius syndrome in that you don't have the facial paralysis, you don't have any of the other health issues that come with it. And it's more like, I guess, superficial, but more superficial presentation than Mobius syndrome. And that was like quite a shock to discover my diagnosis from a TikTok star. Like that's like the most modern story that you could ever hear of a diagnosis. And so I contacted my doctor and I was like, I, learned more about this syndrome, Hanhart syndrome. Do you think this could be my diagnosis? And so he looked into it, and I'm like, I know there's kind of an overlap between the diagnoses, but I think this describes me a lot more because of the connotation that the other one has that this one doesn't have, and how it matches me better. And so he looked into it, and he was like, yeah, I think that matches you pretty well, and that was it. And I was like, I think I was 19 when I discovered it. So like I lived my whole life thinking I had one disability, and then I was like 19 and discovered I had a completely different diagnosis.
That is a remarkable story. Thank you for sharing it. I've not heard yet of anybody discovering more about their diagnosis or discovering their correct diagnosis through social media, but I'm glad that Brielle was there to provide that context clue for you. Now, what about your experience with Hanhart syndrome, and you also developed chronic illness during regular life as well. What was that like?
Yeah,
What was that diagnostic
yeah.
process?
So when I developed my chronic illness, I was 10 years old. And the first kind of initial thought was that it must be connected to my, my birth disability, just because like that's an obvious connection. And so I went back to the doctor who had given me my original diagnosis, and this was before I realized that that was a misdiagnosis. But I went back to him just because he had like the closest like description of my disability, and I checked with him like, could it be possible that this is related to my birth condition? And he was just like, categorically no, like that's not even, nope, it's just not even a question, it's not a possibility, it's just categorically no. But then it was kind of a challenge because when I would go to different doctors trying to get an answer for my chronic illness, they often had the assumption that it had to be connected to my physical disability, and they just wouldn't believe me when I would tell them that like this has been something that I've looked into, this is something that my doctor let me know is not possible. And so a lot of times they were very skeptical of the fact that these things might not be connected. Which was, I think, was quite a challenge because if you're connecting something to something, if you're connecting a diagnosis to another diagnosis when they're not connected, you're not going to be able to approach it with the right mindset, and you're also not going to be able to find the right treatment either, just because you're just getting things mixed up. So it was actually kind of an interesting kind of challenge there for a while, navigating like how to help doctors think about my diagnosis differently and not like come in with these biases that they might have towards me just because like my physical disability is very visible and my invisible disability is very not visible. So I, went through life with just like trying to get a lot of support and trying to get a diagnosis for my chronic illness. I just never really got that kind of diagnosis that I was looking for. And so it was not really, it's never been something where I could find a reason for my chronic illness. Um, but what I ended up learning was my doctor kind of came and he called and he was like, I have a reason for, why you're chronically ill. He said it, I live with severe chronic nausea. And so basically my chronic illness is like, I feel like I'm going to throw up like 24/7 and I don't throw up. I just feel like it to the point of like I feel like I have the flu like all the time, which is like if you know like the 5 seconds before you're gonna throw up, your like mind is swimming and your brain can't like keep your head straight and like you're just completely like almost out of it until something comes out. That's the stage that I'm in 24/7. And so he called and he was like, I have an answer for your chronic illness. And I'm like, great, what is it? And he was like, your diagnosis is chronic idiopathic nausea, which is, if you don't know what that means, that basically says you have chronic nausea and we don't know why, which is a very funny way of saying that I have a lot of fancy words to tell you that we don't know what's happening. um, which was really funny for for him to call that, and he was like so excited because like I have something that I can put on your record. um, but I actually looked into it, and there are several people out there who have very similar experiences to mine. Who most of them never really came to any sort of conclusion on how to treat it or make it go away. So they just kind of live with it, which has also been my experience as well. I've never really been able to find a long-lasting treatment that actually helped over the long period. I found some things that would help very short term, like for a couple of weeks, and then just like it would just not last. um, so it was an interesting kind of experience, though, just because like I'm navigating the system of doctors who are either not believing me or assuming that it has to be related to my physical disability or attributing my disability, my chronic illness to mental health disorders, which I don't have, and then not believing me when I say that I don't have mental health disorders, to finally getting the term of chronic idiopathic nausea, which is kind of the best that we can get. Um, I've learned to kind of live with it. I work remotely, I do my schooling remotely, and that's my way of kind of conserving my energy and protecting my body so that I don't feel worse by overexerting myself. Which it I guess it's just kind of interesting because you have the intersections of your physical disability, and so for myself, like I navigated the world and experienced things where people are like, "Well, you look good. You don't seem like you have anything, so you're probably fine." But then they also see my physical disability and they approach that in a different way than they approach invisible disabilities, and so it's a weird dynamic, but you get used to it, and it's helped me kind of learn my place within the world and how ableism has kind of impacted what.
Fantastic, Jessica. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your answer, and I think you did a great job of comparing your experience with Hanhart syndrome and your experience with chronic idiopathic nausea. I'm glad to hear that you kind of found a way that you can still make life work for you. I love following your accomplishments on LinkedIn and stuff. So on my second question, I want to give you a bit more room to expand upon what you were touching on at the end of your first answer, discussing how you still managed to complete work, go through school. what impact have your diagnoses had on your life? And you could consider this like socially, emotionally, within any kind of communities you inhabit. You talked about it academically a little bit, but just giving you a broader paintbrush to paint your picture with.
Yeah, I think the first thing kind of is like when I was growing up, it was really hard for my family to know what I would be capable of doing and what I would need help with. Um, but the big thing about my disability being born with eye, hands, and feet is like I've learned to exist within my body. I've never known anything different, so I don't feel like I'm missing anything by not having hands. So I don't feel like I'm like you know, like losing a part of myself by not having that. And I feel complete. My body is the way it was made to be, and it was the way it was designed to be. And that's helped me be a stronger person, more creative person. And so I learned how to exist within my body. I learned how to draw without, any assistance, just kind of put pencil and draw. I learned how to, perform. I went to a performing arts school, so I did singing, dancing, and drama. And so I would perform every year at our local community college, and I would dance, which my mom tells me that I have really good rhythm, which is very strange because neither of my parents have good rhythm at all, and I can dance and they cannot. So um, it's so I just kind of learned to live with my body, like I said. And I think the first kind of approach when I was younger was that like I need to learn how to use prosthetics because that might help make my life easier. But at the time, nobody really knew like whether or not that would be true. So I enrolled in I started working towards learning how to use prosthetics, and so I would use it twice a week. I would go in for therapy and learn how to use prosthetics, both hand prosthetics and also feet prosthetics, so I could learn to walk and also use those prosthetics. What I found was that they were very inefficient and very limiting for me because prosthetics are very hot, they're extremely heavy, and you don't have any capacity to feel what you're doing, which is a big part of your day-to-day life is feeling your hands and feeling the pressure that you're putting on things, and that was just something that was lacking in them. And so I did them every week, and I absolutely hated them. Like it just was not really helping me at all. But I think it was really important for me because it helped me with my coordination. It helped me learn whether or not this would work for me, and I gave it a really good shot until I was 10 and I became chronically ill. But I would get into the point where I was probably not going to be using them anymore anyway, just because they weren't really working for me. What I've actually found is most people who have been born with four limb differences, like me, also have the exact same experience. Having prosthetics just don't help you at all. They're just more of a hindrance than a help. Um, and the reason for that I put a lot of thought into like why is that? Because I think a lot of people are confused. It's like how can you possibly live in a world that was built for people with hands and you just like how can that happen? And the reason why prosthetics weren't really helpful for me was the fact that, like, the science of creating prosthetics came from World War II when people were losing their limbs in the war and then not being able to adjust to life without them because they had always known their body to be one way and then they experienced something very traumatic and they had to adjust to the trauma of experiencing that and then also adjust to the trauma of losing a body part. And so that's where the concept of prosthetics came from. Whereas for someone like me, I never lost anything to begin with. I never knew anything different, and so prosthetics aren't really going to help me because I wasn't born to be using something like that. It would be more for someone who either has like maybe they have three fully developed limbs and that last limb is just like way too short and they might need to have a prosthetic because they, might be a little bit lopsided without it. Or, maybe they've lost their limb and they just can't adapt to life without it. But for myself, that's just not something that I can relate to and so that's why they've never really been beneficial to me. But like I said, it means I've had to adapt. I've had to invent a lot of different things to help me do day-to-day tasks, which I think has really been it helped me kind of think outside of the box and navigate the world differently. But the other part of it is that a lot of times people don't know how to help me just because they just can't wrap their head around like my body and my capabilities. And so when I was younger, I went to kind of physical therapy where they would help me with basically trying to figure out what I can do and also helping me with like getting tools to help me with things that I can't do independently. But what I found was that they just didn't really know how to help me at all, just because like even with all the training that they have and all of the experience that they have, it's one thing to be working with physically disabled kids, but it's a very different thing to be working with somebody with a disability that has there's only been like 200 people in the world that have that kind of disability. So it's very hard to even with all of the training to kind of wrap your head around that circumstance and also help them. So most of my life has been navigating and figuring things out on my own just because I'm most of an expert than anybody else on what I can and can't do and what might work and what might not work. Um, but I think it's been really, it helped me build my character. And I think, like I mentioned, a lot of people kind of assume that maybe I'm insecure because I don't really match other people around me, or maybe I feel left out. And that's not an experience that I've had. I feel very secure and comfortable in my body, and my body does a lot for me. I'm thriving and surviving every day because of my body. So that's not something that I really have had an experience with, and I guess that's a blessing. That's a lot of people experience a lot of different, mental health struggles because of their disabilities or alongside their disabilities, and that's something that I've been able to, kind of not have that experience and navigate the world without those kinds of things burdening me.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jessica. That was a really well put answer. And I can also relate as someone with a rare disability how you have to like train the trainer, train your doctors, and how you can only really rely upon yourself and your own disease community sometimes, as you are indeed the experts. I really appreciate these well thought out answers. I also loved a small history lesson about prosthetic limbs. War, combat, and violence have always led to increased prosthetic use and then advancements in prosthetic technology and innovation. Jessica, if you can go back in time and give yourself advice, or if you could find someone else with Hanhart and give them a piece of advice, someone younger than yourself, what advice would you give?
Oh, that's a really hard question. I think the biggest thing that I navigated in the world, like when I was younger, was the fact that like I think a lot of people kind of told me to rely on the professionals to help me. Um, and like I said, the professionals can only help you so much. Like they can only be trained on so many different disorders and so many different disabilities before they just, don't have the capacity or the understanding to understand your specific situation. And so I think the biggest kind of advice that I have is that you absolutely should be reaching out to professionals, reaching out to people who have more knowledge than you, but you also really need to trust yourself and your own knowledge of yourself before anything else. Because if you're relying on professionals to guide you, they're going to disappoint you in a lot of different ways. And then there were a lot of technologies that existed when I was growing up that my physical therapist just didn't tell me about because they never thought that I could use those technologies. And so that meant that as I got older, I discovered those technologies and I've been able to implement them into my life on my own, but without any help. Um, but it means, when you're navigating the life and, you're telling people, like, oh, this is my experience, or, this is a limitation that I have, they'll tell you to reach out to the professionals and ask what the doctors think. But like I said, the doctors aren't really gonna know. People aren't really gonna know a lot about disabilities like yours, especially when there are, only a handful of people on the world. So that means you have to really trust your own instincts and also experiment. Like that was the biggest thing that I did, was just like trying new things and figuring out how to uh, adapt existing technologies and make them better and make them fit me. And that's like lean into that as much as you possibly can, because that's gonna help you, navigate life and also do things that you never thought you could do. Like for myself, when I was um, between the ages of 10 and 12, I used to horseback ride. Like, that's not something that you would think that someone with full limb deficiency could do, but that was something that I was able to learn how to do, and we were able to adapt some different technology to help me be more steady on the horse and ride independently. And so those are things like that will help you do all of the things that you're hoping to do in life, whether it's like surfing or, whatever you want to do. There are ways of getting around any sort of limitations and implementing them in a way that makes sense to you, but also like you can collaborate with other people, but also make sure that you're using your own instincts first and not relying upon other people to tell you what to do.
That's remarkable. I love this story of disabled innovation. Thank you so much, Jessica. I didn't know you did horseback riding. That's neat.
It was such a blast. I really miss it, and it made me love horses. I didn't grow up being like a horse girl. Like that was not like you hear a lot of girls who are obsessed with ponies and stuff. I wasn't like that. I like Barbies. But then I started horseback riding, and I'm like, now I'm a horse girl. My dream is to buy a ranch and have a whole bunch of horses. That would be the life.
Sure. Hope you get your horse ranch one day, my friend. Jessica, as we
Thank
close our
you.
time together, I want to give you a chance that I give everybody, regardless of topic. We as disabled people so rarely get a chance to promote ourselves, put ourselves out there, act like our own cheerleaders, have like a free space to brag. And I want to give that to you now. So any recent wins you've got, shout them out. This is your chance to be your own cheerleader. Step up on your soapbox. If you're interested in like building community or networking, where can people find you online? So this is your free space to brag. Go ahead.
Yeah, I guess one exciting win that I got is I don't know if you've heard of Lime Connect, but they are a program or an organization that developed kind of like a job board for people with disabilities to connect with corporate partners. So they have a fellowship for students with disabilities so that they can meet with corporate partners like one on one, like in person in New York City. And so I was accepted into the fellowship, which means I'm going to be going to New York City for the first time in my life in July, which I'm really excited about. And that's, a big way of kind of representing the disability community to these large organizations that might not realize that they need more disability innovators within their product development teams and in the marketing teams and everything else. So I'm really excited to represent the disability community in that way. And then yeah, if you're interested in finding out, more about me, I'm on LinkedIn, Jessica Lopez. Also, you can find me with like the app REALJESSL, Real Just L, everything: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn.
Remarkable, Jessica. I can't think of a better disability representative to go to New York City and speak truth to power for these corporations. Thank you so much for all that you do, and I've loved catching up with you. Wherever you go, whatever you do, I can't wait to see what's next for you. Thank you again.
Thank you.